Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to Books and Company on behalf of Jeanette Watson, the owner of the shop, who can't be here this evening. My name is Stan Lewis, and I'm the general manager. I've been asked to introduce Daniel Haberman, whose new book, which is downstairs, The Furtive Wall, is just being published. I'm particularly honored to introduce Dan's work because in 1977, in another bookshop, his first book of poems, called Poems, came in. And I looked at it, and I had never heard of this man. And the book was beautiful, and the poems were lovely. And I didn't meet him till sometimes later, and the gentleness of the man came through when I did meet him. And it is an honor to introduce Mr. Haberman this evening. I'd like to quote two people that I've come to respect. Mr. Howard Nemeroff, who says of Daniel Haberman's poems that they are delicate, sensitive, and intelligent. And I do sometimes remark with a touch of envy effects of his that are denied to me. And then one of our really important writers, Guy Davenport, who says of Daniel Haberman's poems, they are first of all quintessential poetry. Of Haberman's mastery there is no doubt. Grace abounds, and in a phrase here, a perfect rhythm there, in a delightfully surprising pattern of words, there is the flash of genius. Daniel Haberman.
Thank you, Stan. You are doubtless like myself, said Flaubert. You have the same terrifying and tedious depths. That epigraph begins my previous book, Poems. And for those of you who are not familiar with my work, I thought I would read 4 or 5 very short poems from that book, just to give you a sense of where I was prior to the last 4 years, which represents the new book, The Furtive Wall. Loitering Hill. The other day, near Loitering Hill, green by the grass, in pranced review, I saw my past and pondered why it was to be my future too. There's a rotting in me grows, a bulbing canker of the soul. At my peril I'd unearth it. There's a rotting in me grows. A pilgrimed soul. There is a time of unsweet regress. Who then believes in coincidence with sophistication beyond our years? Temptation rises to hate that womb and stay the time when I appeared to love the world in innocence. That bloated carnage scowls me mute, and what innocence dared not demand cast round my scanned and pilgrimed soul. When I realized somewhere around the 4th or 5th draft that I had used the image pilgrim soul, I got a little nervous. Those of you who remember Yeats's beautiful lines, but one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. But then I remembered that Mrs. Browning had used it 50 years before Mr. Yeats. So I felt much better about it. I guess that proves that Eliot was right, that the good poet steals, the poor one imitates. I'll just read 2 more poems from the previous book. This is a sonnet in the war meter, It's in hexameter, and the title is obviously punning on the Greek epic usage of hexameter. Sonnet in the war meter. If I write a poem, is it not mine to keep? Do I really have to share it, intruded on? Unsharing, I'm an expert at living alone and dueling with slow silence in the thorough day. Euphony loved and book cared, though empty delight. I'm not at all sure I'd want to be with me. I have many thoughts I no longer share, since he secreted them to a distant time. He carried off my secrets to a garish maze, no less unkind, not knowing he'd impaired. Exposed as Isaac, I stood upon a stage, and, laughter besieged, I began to live unshared. Do we all share such secrets when we failing care? Do I live alone and unsharing share? I suppose I might add, because this is a reading and not a publication, that poets are sneaky fellows, and the I is also a metaphor for we. And many of the poems, certainly in the new book, continues much more aggressively. Our comments on our age, the desultory century, as I see it, in which we live. The last poem from the old book is called Interaction of the Flowers. Petunias raise their lovely heads. I'd rather like to know interaction of the flowers while weeding it's observed. But I and you, we vine ourselves, lashings to the ground, and often brood the weight of us. Annuals we're not. By way of program notes, just to orient both of us, there will be one short break of about 5 minutes, and each of the two sections will average about 20 minutes or so. I might add that the short break is because poetry is so condensed, and the two short segments are caused by the fact that one often needs a hook to get the poet off. They're notorious for that. There's an old theater expression that says, not a dry eye on stage and not a wet eye in the audience. The new book is titled The Furtive Wall, from the first poem in the manuscript, and it begins with a two-line epigraph which combines the early 20th century Russian philosopher Lev Shestov, who I see is with Leo Levante and Ortega y Gasset as major figures with whom we have yet to really reckon. Anyhow, Shestov is combined in two lines with Empedocles, who of course is the 5th century BC Sicilian. And he who can weep can hope, for the blood around the heart is the thought of men. There is a wall, a furtive wall, bluely dark in among the hills. Come rest your thought, leave behind the wills, then go beyond, bring your human ills. I signal now a poising call, there beyond the furtive wall. Even now the russet winds blow over and over the lanky field. Long since the banking geese heel and the tiny snows stray into and out the promenade of trees, while grass recedes, the whitened shame acquiesced into the violet same. Here we're dealing with the blandness and the mediocrity and ever-increasing mediocrity of our age and our art as I see it. Picasso once said that it's necessary for the artist to rail against the Academy, and this poem and the next one seem to do that. Also untitled. Red hand of the sun, high above the wood, winter slow into the windfall night. I have seen a possum quail talking to the nightingale. Winter slow into the windfall night. I have seen a quiet thrush leaping to the barren brush. Winter slow into the windfall night. Would there be a fluted bird howling beauty's darker word? Red hand of the sun, high above the wood, winter slow into the windfall night. These opening poems of the Furtive Wall all have a nature image. I like to think of them as my upcountry poems. The next one, also untitled, is a particular favorite of mine. The trees in gentle umbrage swayed, determined times no perch to loiter. The dancing fears were unallayed, the soul was weary of the slaughter. Dreams were real, the real were dreams, and all beside I might have seen. The heart won't mistress to the mind, my heart's not mistress to my mind. The way of it. With the futile snow of spring, in the still light of my heart, I sing to you, not for the struttings of the barnyard bird, nor the clanging of his woe, scattering the piebald snow, not for the rappings of the grasping hen, nor the stressing of her region to a one-legged reason, as the pieing snow, coloring to the green, becomes obscene. Where is the way of it? Where is the way to the heart? The heart. I cannot find the clock of time. I cannot touch the hands of day. Your hands point the way of it. Point the way to the heart. The heart. The snow fails and the birds to the north, white in their flight with the skying spring, but yet with the still light of my heart, with the futile snow, to you I sing. And the last of the poems that have a nature image is called When I Have Gathered in the Night. Who can time the clocking hours? Who can time where day begins? When I have gathered in the night, when I have stalked from space to space in all compartments of my heart, Who can time the clocking hours? Who can tell the tolling time? In all the rooms where I reside, and lie myself to sleep at night, and lie myself to sleep at night, in all compartments of my heart. Now the imagery shifts to the sea. Certainly a profound influence on my life and on my work. The first of these poems is a 4-line lyric, which is perhaps my favorite form. They come quickly and they're almost unchangeable. Untitled. When lost is in the night and darkness glooms the day, the hours drag me by, the years would fly away. The sea brings in the night, and deep receding me, again, again I turn to the anchoring sea. The next poem, and most of the, or the rest of the series of sea poems, has a very definite philosophical bent to it, and my particular rage at the attempt to avoid the past, the tradition. I don't mean to keep quoting Picasso. I seem to be doing that tonight, but he once said that without tradition there can be no art. I would say that without tradition there can be no anything. Blear to the night, on into obsoleting night, buoyed past jetties, past the shale, dark of the night. Blear, blear to the heart, heel to the wind with no answering helm, striven past silence, past the shoals, time of the night. On, in obsoleting night. The next poem is titled Sea Chantey, and I have two comments to make about it. One, it commits the 20th century poetical sin of having an abstract adjective. We live in a time where in the name of license and freedom we have, it seems to me, more regulations, or as many regulations as any other time. It's a chimera to think that we have artistic freedom or poetical freedom. It's only an anguished rebellion against the previous century and the academy. One has to write poems that are grounded. But if you think of the 30th sonnet, winter the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. It's a pretty good poem, and it's not grounded. Just as an aside, I had a weekend in Cumbria in which the wonderful poet Basil Bunting was there also house guesting for the weekend at Jonathan Williams' cottage. And we got into this discussion, and I made that point. And he just looked at me and said, "Don't much care for the Shakespeare sonnets." I got up, we were at about the stage of dinner at coffee, and said, "That doesn't." He's still a wonderful poet. There also is a reference, and those of you sailors will know, to being caught in irons, which is a very dangerous time. One doesn't go forward, one doesn't go back, and but quickly it can change and one can snap a mast. But the metaphorical image is one of danger. So here's a sea chanty. Aleatory wind on the numinous sea, the wail of the Harkness is in the sail, gust to a time when I was free. Aleatory wind on the numinous sea, the sail is luffing, no one to hail, listing to starboard, though helm's a lee, caught here in irons, 3 steps to bail. Yet the wail of the Harkness is in the sail. O aleatory wind of a numinous sea. The next poem is a sonnet, and I'm back to railing at the Academy, which never really changes, and I would only be repeating what I said earlier, except this is also a plea for language and an absence of license, or the excess of what we like to think of free. Here's a sonnet. Primitive, in my perpetual dawn, I seek the sea edged by a sundry sky, and flail-watered notions that tyrannize, and monstrous bankrupt the lovelier word, give way of theories, they destroy the wise, accede back through the eloquent heart, give in to the clouds in the awesome day, curl in the sea at the edge of the sky, while tedious license stifles the past, ignoring music that inures the heart, ignoring mere language, seamster of thought, let the freer declaim, mediocre on the trolling sea, drained of denizen, primitive to my perpetual dawn. You who have startled the sound of the sea, you who are startled like me, give to the time of the sea, and walk in the marsh of the sea. Now that poem starts to get very obscure, and I can only, in my defense, quote a comment of Pascal, in which he said that, do not accuse me of obscurity because I lay claim to it. The last poem that I'm going to read in this section, I believe that I can state that it's an extraordinary poem. In fact, I think it's a superb poem. In fact, I have to go further and say I think it's a magnificent poem. I can say all those things because it's not mine. It was written by a 19-year-old Greek girl, probably during the 4th century BC. It's a lament by the poet ERINNA for her dead girlhood friend BAUCIS. And I would like to just quickly point out that the ancients regarded ERINNA, 19 years old, the ancients regarded her as second only to Sappho among woman poets. And she died less than a year after she wrote this poem. Her grief was so intense. The poem was lost for 2,000 years. And what you're going to hear is the first poetical translation into a modern language. The translation was done from fragments discovered in 1928, that recently, and was done in collaboration with Marilyn B. Arthur. Marilyn had shown me the lament shortly after my mother died. And those of you in the audience who are artists know that the way we exercise grief is we paint it, we write it. In a way, we're lucky to have that. But please, please do not think of this as an antiquarian poem. The best art is always modern, in the real sense of the word. The way I think El Greco was modern, or late Beethoven, the Opus 109 or the Opus 131 come to mind. It's timeless. There are only a few things that you should know. And then, because they're a little obscure, and then forget about it. And just let ERINNA'S speak to you. First of all, there's a reference to Mormo. Mormo was the boogeyman in ancient Greece. Today, all the boogeymen are male. In pre-Hellenistic Greece, which was a simpler and less self-conscious time, all of the boogies were female. But if you think about, the Greek word is mormo. If we think about the first word we speak, and the poetic sounds of it, sucking on a breast as an infant, we say, which would be mama. Well, the excess of mama, it seems to me, would be mormo. So that's what mormo is. Hymen is, of course, the god of marriage. Aphrodite, of course, is the goddess of love, Venus in Latin. And then we have the reference of a tortoise. And this I have to, if you'll bear with me, take a moment to explain because it is quite obscure. The tortoise was a traditional ring game played by pubescent girls, and it was already old 2,500 years ago when ERINNA wrote. Scholars disagree as to what it means, and what I thought I would do for tonight is simply, I've typed out the lines and I'll read it to you and you can join the scholarly argument as to what it means. To me it's obvious, but I'm a great generalizer. The girls would sit around in a circle, and the tortoise was what we would call it. She would be in the middle. And the girls would say, "Tortoise, little tortoise, what are you doing in the middle?" And the tortoise would say, "I'm winding my wool and yawn from my leisure." And the girls would say, "Your little one, how did he die?" And the tortoise would answer, "From white horses he sprang into the sea." Deep into the wave you raced, leaping from white horses, whirling the night on running feet. But loudly I shouted, "Dearest, you're mine." Then you, the tortoise, skipping, ran to the rutted garth of the great court. "These things I lament in sorrow," said BAUCIS. "These are for me, O maiden, warm trails back through my heart. Joy once filled, smolders in ash. Young in rooms without a care, we held our miming dolls, girls in the pretense of young brides, and the toward dawn mother lotted wool to tending woman, calling BAUCIS to salt the meat. Oh, what trembling when we were small, and fear was brought by Mormo, huge of ear up on her head, with 4 feet walking, always changing from face to other. But mounted in the bed of your husband, dearest BAUCIS, you forgot things heard from mother, while still the littler child. Fast Aphrodite set your forgetful heart. So I lament, neglecting though your obsequies. Unprofaned my feet may not leave, and my naked hairs not loosed abroad. No lighted eye may disgrace your corpse, and in this house, oh my BAUCIS, purpling shame grips me about. Wretched ERINNA, 19, I moan with a blush to grieve. Old woman voice the mortal bloom. One cries out the lamenting flame. Hymen, O Hymenaeus! While the night whirls unvoiced, darkness is on my eyes. Thank you. Let's start with a voice from the 2nd century BC, speaking on Erinna. It's an epigram by Antipater of Sidon, who lived in Phoenicia, on the 19-year-old girl. And as always, I think that art that is valid at any time. And remember that Antipater was as removed chronologically from Erinna as we are from Alexander Pope. Erinna's words are few, no excess in her song. Her little epic chants the lotting of the muse. For her remembrance no music ceased away, or black in the bind of night's shadowy wing. Yet we, the countless fashioned throng of poets, lie rotting, stranger, battalioned in forgetfulness. The croaking jackdaws scattered in the springtime clouds are as nothing to the soft murmurs of the swan. The section consists of a series of translations of ancient fragments, all done in collaboration with Professor Arthur, including Archilochus's longest extant fragment, which was just discovered in 1964 on a fourth-rate mummy. Well, I can only defend Archilochus. You have to understand that the Archilochus was writing at the same time that the Old Testament was written. It's really old. But when it came to mummies, the bourgeois and the grand bourgeois always win. And they were wrapped in linen and beautiful things. And the peasants were wrapped in poetry. So things really don't change. But because of time, I'll move on to the next section of the book, which are woman poems. You have to have them. And I'll let them speak for themselves, except to say, don't worry, I'll survive. The soul seems to endure. Jonathan Swift once said of poets that fiction is their trade. Or to put it in context, I gave a private reading for some friends back in the summer, and I mentioned the comment of Thomas Wyatt, who was, of course, the first English sonneteer and somebody that Shakespeare admired, and we still admire to this day. And Wyatt wrote many, many weeping, wailing love poems that he really grieved over. But at the end of it, he managed to survive because the soul does endure. And he wrote the following lines. Ha ha ha, and I am free, for now I have my liberty. So here are some woman poems. It's funny now, but it wasn't at the time. Ambivalence is a terrible thing. In this poem, the word wait is used as in to wait for something, not as in the wait of a train. Midnight and a rambling sky. Lady, I cannot say I'm pleased with me as I par the gap of age and youth. and I wander in the weight of night, and I wonder where the wrong began. Lady, if we could now just have met, and time were back to younger time, but love defaults to a rambling sky, the stars lean down and quietly laugh. Early of an evening. In the early of the evening, while the world was marking time, she left without a reason, and yet with some alarm. Her thoughts were all of going, she wouldn't seem to stay. In the early of the evening, while the world was marking time. The next poem is a love sonnet. And the first 13 lines are within quotes as a letter, and it's titled A Letter from the Virgin Isles. And the last line, making the 14 necessary lines, is a sarcastic comment on myself. There are poets who take the high road, like Goethe, and poets who take the low road, like Heine or Emily Dickinson. I seem to have taken the low road. Both are valid. So here's a sonnet entitled A Letter from the Virgin Isles. When you have resolved what it is you want, and can think of me in the tender time, then I'll come to you in the tender time, hold trembling hand to a trembling hand. But now you live in another's house, and walk with him in another's house, yet cling to me with a trembling hand, and surprise the fierceness of my heart. Give up this thought, leave me be. Love, I say, is a Catholic thing. Affairs are not by love construed, as other than the world has known. Conduct your way. Compose yourself. Woman, I say, don't come when time is terse. He holds the woman. He keeps the woman while I hold the verse. As often happens in relationships with the imprudent, but I'm suddenly thinking of a comment of William Hazlitt's, who's somebody I admire and who is the real originator of negative capability. Keats, sitting in his lectures back in the 1820s, no man may say he is not a fool until he has been in love. So we go forward and we go back and we go forward and we go back. Here's a 4-line lyric, which, as I said earlier, is my favorite form. And with apologies to Hardy's Midnight on the Great Western, it's called The Journeying Girl. Go ramble in the lolling hills, yet stay with me this gruffing night. You neighbored love, O journeying girl, in the fretted surface of the day. Dirge in flight. Things didn't work out at all well. Dirge in flight. I was perfect and she was imperfect. And she got angry. That's an observation that takes years of distance to see. Dirge in flight. Yet astride the peccant moon, sad sail pillowing to the sky, perceptive on the spread of night, too long we flutter in the bind. Imperious bird declaims the dawn, then deigns a step from out the sky. I remember, night of the moon may descend to a bird whose perch preludes the frieze of vanity, pride's pejoration for the trenchant day. Most of you, I'm sure, know that an aubade is originally a French love song that is sung at dawn, and it is sung with delight and all the things that lovers do at dawn. But it isn't necessarily so. It can be the other kind and still qualify as an aubade. This is one of the other kind. It's called No Child of Morning. Let us say I'm sad for all the world. Oh, let's just say I'm sad for me and you. You cannot change the things you do. And I, no child of morning, though yet of yesterday, I cannot stay. Oh, let us say I'm silent to the world. Oh, let's just say I'm silently unfurled, while whispering up a spiral and revealed, I cannot change the hum of you and me. It is easy as the hero, hard to live a life. Oh, let's just say I'm sad for all the world. In the weight of night. And again, wait as in to wait for something. I, by a lake, face the scouring sky and think of the time when love lay by. My love lay by, delightedly eating wine we were drinking, when I and my love faced the scouring sky, the scouring sky. Now I, on my back, with a book to delight, think of hours to come in the weight of night, the weight of night, listlessly dreaming and noteworthy seeming, all think of the time when love lay by. My love lay by. I suppose, of course, nothing's new, though flowers are few in the heart of the world, except, of course, my love for her. And though, of course, we are but two, she's severed and strew in the heart of my world. I would have been but one with her. Remember what I said in the beginning, it works out okay. The soul endures. The next poem is a prose paragraph. It is not poetry. In spite of all of what is called today by the avant-garde as prose poetry, I insist that this is not prose poetry because it doesn't exist. It's an oxymoron. What we have here is a prose paragraph. I've never read it at a formal reading, and I would like to try. But I would like to just make one comment as a way of venting my spleen about what is modern and avant-garde. It often is just a lack of intelligence, which was Sir Herbert Reed's comment. And we think of something new that we've done in prose poetry, or this poetry, that form. So I brought along with me a quote from 1825 by a fellow named Pushkin, who was a pretty good poet. And so we don't forget how long ago 1825 was. That's the time when Schubert and Beethoven and Shelley and Keats were writing. In 1825, Pushkin wrote a letter to his brother saying, "They are saying that in verse, the verse is not the main thing. What then is the main thing? This heresy must be eradicated." I admire his passion. This is called a tale, and it's a prose paragraph. It is not poetry. What it's doing in the book, I don't know, but it's there. One morning at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I just wrote it, and there it is. So this is called a tale. Although he knew it to be insane, the truth was known. He stood bowed and observing. His hurts were his character, and that his destiny. Preceding himself with naivete, he had suited an arrogance of the unarmed and waited. She came, the wrong woman. He wanted her, and they traveled, the moon being lit in the mouth of the sky. Imaging him, she was weakest of the strong and strongest of the weak. She was as the face of the moon, he the gleaming of the sun. No, she was the sun and he the other, pallid alternation. Dibbicks danced on a frosted cake. Bouquets of laughter lined the aisle. As he was strewn about, memories crowded the jewel box of his soul. He prepared to place grief's mantle on. The truth was known, and he knew it to be insane. The last of the woman poems that I'll read tonight is called Song of the Unwary Oaf, which I think is a rather wonderful way to describe oneself, as an unwary oaf. There's a reference in it to a lady named Mikhail. And many of you, I'm sure, will remember that Mikhail was the daughter of King Saul. And she looked out the window and saw David, and I think it was in front of the ark, in the King James Version, singing and dancing in the street, and she despised him in her heart. But having said earlier of Jonathan Swift's comment that of poets that fiction is their trade, I have to say of women that fiction is their trade, because she later splits out the window, being angry at her father than she is at David, and marries David. So her anger seems to have a little bit to do with resistance. So here's a song of the unwary oaf. Little flower of twisted root, how dare you play a singing lute? Won't you know the day's not right to dance and sing in Mikhail's sight? Stubborn flower, why rise to grow? Struggling soil is teemed below. Oh, little flower, bend your head. Give in, enough to shed. The little flower, unwary oaf, stubborn, stiff-necked, foolish growth, laughed and played his singing lute. Twisted is a changeling word, how it's used is surely moot. The next section of the Furtive Wall is a long series of epigrams that deals with Edward Dahlberg and Van Gogh and our friend poor Attis from Catullus' 63rd, and Shakespeare. I'm going to skip over it because of time. Epigrams, you know, are a very special thing in which poets vent their spleen. I was in Ireland last October, and wherever I went, it was very nice to be respected. I often think that poets in America are on the level of civil service, the firemen, police department. But in Ireland, they're feared, particularly in the west of Ireland. And wherever I went, they said, "An filler," which is Gaelic for poet. It isn't that they were respectful of poetry. They were worried that I would write a poem about them. And ever since Archilochus, by the way, I might say, who ruined Helicon and is famous for that. But I would like to read a few comical poems because we haven't had many laughs tonight. And I would just like to read the epigraph that opens the series of epigrams. And it's from Sir Walter Raleigh, and it's a particular favorite of mine because we live in a century, and I'm going to use these terms as before the 20th century. We did have a vocabulary before Freud, and it's sometimes important to remember that. We live in an age where, denying it or not, we extol character as opposed to personality. And each of the epigrams deal with the personality of the individual, such as Edward Dahlberg, who was my mentor and died a few years ago and was just no more important influence on my life. What Sir Walter Raleigh said in one sentence is, "No man can walk abroad save on his own shadow." So I'll just read just 3 funny poems, so we have a few laughs here tonight. This is an epigram, and let me just say that I think that a book of poetry should be similar to a chamber music work. It should have highs and lows and depths and comical moments, the way the Beethoven 131 has. I think it's important. All are aspects of the human soul, and all are valid. This poem is called, this epigram, Giovanni Angelo Medici. And it has a comment over the beginning of it. And what it says is, Daniel da Volterra was a painter who was commissioned by the Vatican to paint cloths over the genitalia of the Michelangelo's male figures on the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. Da Volterra became known by other painters with total contempt as Bragatone, the breeches maker. So here is a comment on Giovanni Angelo Medici. It was Pius IV who ordered a cloth and had breeches adorned so he wouldn't fawn and no longer giggle at nudes by Michelangelo. And the second of the 3 comic poems is called The Poetaster. And those of you who know your Ben Jonson, or even earlier in the Latin, the originating of the phrase the poetaster, this has a comment over it from Alain Lesage, a wonderful writer who was a hero of Stendhal's. It simply says, and it's a good comment on writers, he mauled them, every one without mercy. It was easy enough to see he was an author. This is in quotes and is exactly true. Not without lessons, you're writing a verse. Come loiter on my euphonious perch. $12 the hour, unmetered fee. Often the Village Voice has published me. I'd like to kill that son of a bitch. And the last one I shall read is called Artists Dining in the Hamptons. Now, all of us know the Hamptons. That's the place that New Yorkers take very seriously, deadly seriously. And the rest of the world is indulgent about this deadly seriousness. It's the ultimate Stendhalian place. And it has a comment from our friend Baudelaire. The study of the beautiful is a duel in which the artist cries out with fear before he is vanquished. This actually happened, and I'm not going to mention the name because that's what the Irish fear, but it's a true story, and a famous painter, and she actually said this. I just put it into meter, and it's in quotes. Artist dining in the Hamptons. Then you're giving a dinner, not without me. To improve my art, I'll leave a husband home and improve cachet with a gallery drone. Then delight in my canvas that vanquished me. Due to time, I'm going to skip over the rest of the Furtive Wall and come to the last poems and the afterward poem. These poems are particularly important to me because they're the most recent ones. I feel the way Mandelstam did, that the correct order for a book of poetry is its chronological order of the writing, because hopefully the poet grows. Keats describes this eloquently in his letters. We live in a room that we can't get out of, says Keats, and we think the door is locked. And suddenly we discover through our art, or whatever form of maturation we're able to use, that the door was never locked. We just thought that it was locked. And we can open it and we get to the next room. And then the same struggle begins again. I'm obviously very fond of Keats's letters. I'll read these through with very few comments and let them speak for themselves. Most of them have strongly philosophical comments on the time in which we live, and it's the ending of the Furtive Wall. Walk with me where the moon is slung in incising night. Walk with me and hold my hand. Sonnet. Let time, in disparagement of days, inure the soul that yearns to exceed through regions of loss and little praise, where jackdaws winging caw the sky and stult the cuttings of the blessed. The easy ones are blessed, they say, not caught between 2 days, they say, where nighttime grackles wander wide and strut with pleasures their behest. Birching sentinels arch unaware as enrageous claims define the field. Bold shrubs align this blurting sphere. O time, who loves to lose oneself, how different is the discourse of today. Bleak of the heart and hearth, I recollect myself in the gnaw of January, a little movement so far on the crippling snow. And in conjunction with a day, slow dreams are dreamt in ripened time, those shadows bleaken in reproach, when in conjunction with a day. And in conjunction with a day, as dear again as dear to me, how sad a thing is sadness now, when in conjunction with a day. The next poem uses the word loots, and it's important in hearing it to know that it is as in to loot a store, not as in to play a loot. And this poem and the one after it I'm particularly fond of. I would just like to add that poems are like children. We, unfortunately, we'd like to deny it, but we have favorites. It's untitled. In a fantasy of my wilder heart, as deafened silence loots the night, yes, loots the night, edged to extremity while all's asleep, yes, all asleep. If the angry night would only weep, as squall clouds bloat the quickened sky, ruminations rain on the ruined dawn. Again I ask, and again ask why. I came back from the west of Ireland with this poem. And believe it or not, it's sometimes hard to tell, but this is an optimistic poem. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived by the walls of the night, lived with the fear of a fear and the turf-side clashings. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived of a time dismembered, lived with the old sea lashings, and no one to answer. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived, though the night remembers, and unruffled flows the sky above the draggled beach. Indian Coed plan we do not define, stumbling past the placid rock, loathly reeling in aggressive shade, now the rising beauty of a terrible moon. Now the last poem in the book, except for the afterword poem. I read it with apologies to Dante for his phrase, "Look and pass." I'm reminded of a letter that Einstein wrote to somebody who unfortunately did not get out of Germany, and it was getting late in the years, and Einstein had to write very cautiously, of course, to get the letter through during the Nazi regime. And what he said essentially was, we walk with the flowers, and we have a few friends. I forget the rest of it, but I think you get the essence of what he was saying. This is called Bird in Flight. It's in 4 stanzas. Dear little bird, flown from the wildings of her hair, as a gift of time that wends, glisk with delight a gentler song. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds and time descends. Dear little bird, so zealous in refulgence, lilting streams and tumbling voids, drenching rocks, soon pleat the night. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds and time descends. Dear little bird, why disquieted, though tempted? Why arrogated to dismay? With lamentation look and pass. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds and time descends. Dear little bird, free solitary, spirit alone, unbound, probate, homeless on the earth, fly, oh fly, on wings of weakness, fly, frail Jeremiah, probate of time. Dear little bird, time unfolds and time descends. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds, and time descends. The afterword poem, which is very short, and I'll end the reading with it, says, there is a certain sycamore tree down by old Hillary Brook. Come wander to the sycamore tree, but bring the doubts I took. You'll find the way is easy, though a path's been lost some nights. Just ask the one who answers, the source of Hillary Brook. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're all cordially invited to share in some wine and cheese downstairs, and Dan would be pleased to sign his book, and thank you for coming.